Well, if you came up with a scale that could predict insurance losses, then you'd be winning the insurance game, wouldn't you? Because at the moment, we can't even say what the losses are, a few weeks after a storm's hit, let alone being able to predict it just based on the physical characteristics of a storm.
The discussion this evening is going to be around sort of hurricanes and climate change. And specifically, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about if it were to be the worst hurricane on record, a record-breaking hurricane making landfall in a really highly exposed area, what would this, are we prepared for this, and sort of what would it mean? So that's sort of the background to this. But before we dive in, we were talking about the title of the session, and it says here, are we ready for a Cat 6? So just to be very clear, there is no Category 6 hurricane at present. So I'm sure you're all aware that this terminology, Category 1 through 5, comes from Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale, and it runs from 1 through 5 and is based on wind speed. But Cat 6 does not yet exist. So it's just loosely here as sort of something that means something that is extreme off the scale, off the charts. So I guess when we were discussing this one earlier, we were thinking about, well, do we think that the Saffir-Simpson scale is actually fit for purpose? If we think that climate change may impact hurricanes so severely, is it still an appropriate tool for assessing risk and understanding risk in a changing climate? So I guess I'll just start with you, Tom, since you're there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really interesting one, right? I think I'd probably think about separating the climate change question from it to start with, because it's obviously a very old scale that's tried to combine engineering and damage states effectively with wind speed. But it's not, I guess, depending on who you are, it's not useful to a lot of people. And I think, so it was originally theorized by Herb Saffir and Bob Simpson to give that sort of communication to the public, but maybe doesn't do a good job. It certainly doesn't do a good job of predicting insurance losses, right? It's not. There is a fair correlation for like major minor hurricanes, but once you get out and split them to Cat 1 to 5, there isn't. So there are a number of other metrics and scales that are available. Lots of different academics advocating in different ways, all trying to say that this other alternative scale would be better for communication. But I don't know, I think from where I sit and thinking about the reinsurance and risk side, I would probably say there isn't necessarily a great scale. And we should just be careful when we're talking about these things, that whatever scale you use possibly isn't going to be the best predictor of insurance losses.
I agree. I mean, I think the scale as it exists now is useful, and I think if we expect more from it than it was designed to do, or than it can do, then we're not being fair to it. I think it's very helpful that in a way that it doesn't necessarily try to predict insurance losses. What it is an objective measure of the strength of an event, sort of in its physical characteristics. And the fact that you can take a Cat 5 hurricane and put it in different places or at different times with different exposure bases means that you've got the consistency there about the hazard that you're inflicting upon the real world, but then it's all those factors in the real world that determine what the damageability is, and then what the damage is, and then what the insurance losses are. And if you tried to come up with a scale that could predict insurance, well, if you came up with a scale that could predict insurance losses, then you'd be winning the insurance game, wouldn't you? Because at the moment, we can't even say what the losses are, a few weeks after a storm's hit, let alone being able to predict it just based on the physical characteristics of a storm. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say we should change it.
What about including things like, surge or rainfall?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of where I agree and disagree with my panelists here. The scale clearly is working to a degree, because we've just seen in the loss of life, for example, the amount of loss of life as a result of wind speed is relatively low compared to flood and surge. So stripping away the insurance component right now, what can we do, or what could be done to differentiate the levels of risk with those perils, right? And inherently that then does also lead to the whole damage standpoint as well. I mean, we were looking at, I don't know if anybody's actually seen on the National Hurricane Centre website the characterisation and the very small video that they play on it, but by Cat 4, there's just nothing left anyway. So what is the difference between Cat 4 and Cat 5? Or potentially a Cat 6. But yeah, it's ultimately, yes, it is useful, and it's something that's been established for a very long time. But I think as we go through, and especially considering the impact of climate change, does a Cat 5 still just mean a Cat 5? I don't think so.
Supplementing it with additional information that can make it more helpful, like when they say, well, it's a Cat 3 storm, but it's a Cat 4 storm surge. That adds a bit more information. And maybe, I don't know whether that really means anything or is particularly accurate, but, if we had something like that, then that would help.
I think just very quickly to add, if you look at other parts in the world, right, there's typhoon, there's a super typhoon, and those super typhoons are often the ones that would be classified much higher than a normal Cat 5. Haiyan, for example, what was that, 210 mile an hour wind speeds? Is that the kind of terminology that we could be moving towards to incorporate all of those elements?
But I guess there's a deeper question there, though. So you've got, like, Hurricane Andrew caused major damage, but it was the tiniest wind field. But you look at a Katrina, right? Huge wind field. And, yeah, potentially there's a lot of things that are probably missing from the scales that, might make our view of it a lot more useful.
Okay, brilliant. I think we could probably have talked about that for the full 20 minutes, but we should move on. So I've got a question for Tom, which is, do you think that an extreme tropical cyclone is more likely because of climate change?
Spiciest question. So, right, facts are, right, that we know that sea surface temperatures are increasing. We know that they're expanding poleward. We know that potential intensity, so a measure of the energy in the system and the vertical column of the atmosphere, potential intensity that a hurricane could be is increasing and getting to higher latitudes. But it's really how that actually plays out with all the other variables is really difficult. And I guess we know potential intensity because it's so closely linked to temperature. So the sort of logic follows that, yes, if we understand that, then there is more probability of having really extreme hurricanes. But there's so many other variables that control this, right? So there's a paper by Dan Chavas at Purdue that's not out yet, but is going to show that while potential intensity is going that way, depending on the seaboard and the different variables along the coast, you get really local changes, and doesn't necessarily always go one way. So I guess it's really difficult. I guess generally is yes, but also no. And then how those variables actually play out as well. So there's a really interesting paper this year, actually. I think it was earlier this year when it fully came out, but it was showing that actually the genesis rate of hurricanes, so hurricane strength tropical cyclones, has actually gone southwards since 1979. So again, it's clearly, and they link that to the wind shear, which is a dynamic thing, which we don't really do a good job of in climate models. So again, how this is all going to play out to impact that probability, generally yes, but also no. Don't know. Well,
do you want to come back on that one, Chris?
Yeah, no, I think it sort of, if we rewind it a little bit as well, what do we mean by extreme, right? Extreme wind speeds, extreme rainfall, extreme flooding, or the interaction with population centres or insured assets, right? So we could, in theory, end up with multiple Cat 1s, but actually they have a much larger impact than a severe massive storm, right? I mean, Hurricane Charlie was a very, very small storm, but does rank up there as a very high loss. So yeah, how does that interaction between events also match up with that, or our view of extreme?
And what about, I think we talked earlier about, the fact that it's not all just about the hazard, there are other components in there. So I know you think a lot about this, Chris.
Unfortunately. Hopefully I will get an invite back to the US at some point. But I think, especially in the current environment, right, we do also have to think about the socio-political landscape as well, right? Especially when you're talking about things like demand surge, and I know we had a bit of a discussion about that earlier. But in an environment where labour shortages are exacerbated by situations, what does that mean for rebuild costs? We have examples in the sort of the LA wildfires, and I'm obviously digressing to the other side of the US right now, but there were rebuild costs that potentially were 3, 4, 5 times what they were thought about because of the impact of the LA, and not even availability of labour, but the impacts of things like the LA Olympics and those kind of things. So actually, if we start to have smaller storms more frequently, that could have a disproportionate effect on our overall insurance losses, let alone the insurance gap itself.
And what about preparedness? Do you think that we're prepared for, events that rapidly intensify right before landfall, where you're not able to give that warning just before?
But actually, I can be spicier on this one, I guess. Yeah, like I don't really understand this obsession with rapid intensification. Like I really don't. Like it is important, right, for that final forecast. But as sitting here as an insurer, does it matter? Does it really? Can you do anything about it at that point?
I think it matters more on a societal level if you're for getting people out of the way.
To sound horrific, though, like why are we talking about it?
Because we care about people.
And maybe because there are parts of the world where you might be able to do something about protecting some of your property assets better. If you knew that a big storm was coming, you might be able to mitigate some of the insurance loss.
Don't get me wrong. I absolutely think that's the thing that we do a bad job of at the moment, right, as an industry. And like thinking about, as Paul was saying, like all of that information at our fingertips should be used in advance, to try and communicate this, but probably isn't. But if we did, I absolutely would see the value, I think.
I mean, I would come back on that. I mean, some of the insurers will send out text messages to people saying, there's a hurricane on the way, go and do whatever it is you need to do. And if that process is interrupted, perhaps they're more highly at risk of a bigger loss because they're counting on the fact that people are going to take that preemptive action.
I think that preemptive action also comes from that whole sort of resilience perspective as well. I mean, the image from Hurricane Ian of that guy that built that very nice house, designed it to Cat 5 level standards. There was a tiny bit of roof damage, and even protected the home behind it. Those are the kind of people that are taking this stuff seriously. But then at the same time, without the information about things like the intensification, how do you prepare for that? And the scary news coming out from the US this week, I mean, Michael Lowry's publication on that around the disbandment of the microwave satellite program. How do we know whether it's from a purely humanitarian perspective or even preparedness perspective, how will people know what action to take in that side of things?
Yeah, I agree, but I'm gonna double down on you, Chris. Like, it only matters like the intensity at landfall or some other metric that we've been discussing, right? Like, from our side at least, for trying to quantify losses. So I guess there's some deeper point in what I'm trying to say here, which is like I worry that rapid intensification conversation has captured scientific narratives in the last few years, and it makes loads of headlines. And I worry that maybe as an industry, we're quite susceptible to being driven by those headlines, and maybe we miss the point, and maybe there are some other metrics that we should be looking at.
I think just to double down on your double down, we could be here a while. I think we've got 5 minutes left. So how many doublings can we have? But if you think about it, yeah, absolutely. If there was a Cat 5 heading straight for Miami, none of us would be here. We'd all be calculating things, of course. But ultimately, there's nothing we can do about that, right? And what we then need to do as an industry is be there for our clients. And if that means that we can deploy financial aid in terms of, paying claims early, that all leads to a better relationship between insurer and client, and also improves that sort of message going forward that, we are here. Like our CEO always talks about, the client has to be a focus of what we do, and it's not necessarily just about getting it right before it happens, but let's get it right once it's happened as well.
Well, thanks for that discussion, but I'm going to move us on to maybe thinking about what it might take to sort of shake the insurance market. What would be a sort of groundbreaking event? Emma, I don't know if you've got some thoughts on that. Yeah, I have some thoughts on that. I guess, number one, it depends what you mean by shake the insurance market. So, in my view, any event of any description that is more extreme and therefore probably less probable, but is extreme and beyond the 1 in 200, is going to shake the insurance industry. The whole insurance industry, well, where we're Solvency II driven in this part of the world and probably, everywhere, is capitalised to a certain level, and we're all pretty commonly capitalised to around 1 in 200, and some, more multiples of that. But if we had a 1 in 1,000 event, a really extreme event, then the industry would be shaken in the sense that there would be insolvencies and difficulties in paying claims and all of that sort of thing. What I don't think that should do necessarily is shake our belief in our models, because we all know as cat modelers that an event that's very, very unlikely could still happen tomorrow. And just because the model said it was a 1 in 10,000
doesn't mean it can't happen, and if it happens, and if it happens, the model was wrong. What would really shake us would be something that wasn't in our models. It would be the earthquake that was beyond a 9 occurring somewhere where the models didn't even think you could have an earthquake that big, or it would be a peril that we haven't even really thought about, or it would be the tornadoes from Hurricane Milton being worse than they were and really hitting really populated areas and doing a lot more damage than they ultimately did, or it would be something like Harvey and extreme rainfall after a hurricane, which was quite unexpected, and we weren't really thinking about rainfall-induced flooding at that point. We now all are, which is great, but it's those sorts of things. It's the things that we don't even have in our models that would really shake, I think, our faith in what we do for a living. But the industry as a whole would be shaken by a big event, regardless of whether it was a model whether it was modelled or not, because we're not ultimately capitalised for something that big, and we can't be. And I was just thinking about what Chris said about the guy who built his house to Cat 5 standards. Like, you'd have to be quite rich to do that. It costs a lot to really build buildings that can withstand the most extreme events. And in the same way, it would really cost a lot to capitalise your insurance company to the most extreme event that could happen. And that's why we don't. We sort of pick a point at which probability balances out with severity and the cost of capital is efficient. It makes sense for the business that we're writing and the premiums we can charge. But ultimately, if something really, really bad happens, the industry is shaken.
Tommy, you look like you want to come in?
Yeah, I did, because the question's really related to actually the question that Nico posed to Cameron earlier, right? Which is like, do you think that the machine learning or AI, whatever term you're going to put on it, has more imagination than human, right?
Yeah.
And resoundingly yes, from my perspective, right? Because why are we shocked by Hurricane Harvey, right? It's just a stalling event that led to that rainfall. Why are we shocked by the successive events every few years that cause panic? And thankfully, thanks to the CAT models, right, haven't really caused massive insolvencies since '92 on the hurricane side, but still some actually from Katrina. But they shouldn't be shocking, and yet we continue to be. And so clearly we're still missing something about those shocks. And yeah, I think it's a big opportunity in that space for a lot of people. It doesn't just have to be AML. There can be, I guess, lots of other ways of trying to treat it. But I would say that's one thing that I think we do have a failure of. It's a failure of looking outside the box to things that after the event seem really obvious.
No, I was just going to say, just to that exact point, I did a bit of audience interaction. I guess a show of hands of who's heard of the storm Wrong Way Lenny. Tyler, you read my email, great. Yeah, but that is a Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea hurricane that went the wrong way, right? So to your point, Tom, yeah, there is. Everybody's thought of these things. It's just I think we're probably just a little bit scared what the outcomes might be. So yeah, no, I think we do have to be a little bit more imaginative with those kind of scenarios, and yeah, it comes back to the whole point that scenarios are very useful in this kind of situation. What if? So what? Quite simple, really.
Okay, brilliant. I had a whole load more questions, but we are out of time, so I will wrap it up there. Thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists.